Nobody expected the Indiana Fever to lose. But what shocked fans even more wasn't the final score, it was what happened after the buzzer. A single press conference may have revealed a much bigger problem than bad shooting, missed plays, or turnovers. It raised one uncomfortable question that has divided basketball fans everywhere. Is Caitlin Clark being held responsible for problems she didn't create? And if your franchise player is taking the blame while the real issues remain untouched, how can any team expect to grow? Today we're breaking down the film, the coaching decisions, the offensive structure, and the post-game comments that have everyone talking. This isn't about defending one player or attacking another. It's about following the evidence on the court and asking whether accountability inside the Indiana Fever is being applied equally. Because if the answers are no, then this team has a much bigger problem than one loss. There is an old principle that applies to every successful organization, whether it is business, military leadership, or professional sports. Great leaders don't disappear when things go wrong. They step forward. They protect the people working under them, accept responsibility for failure, and then fix the problems behind closed doors. Weak leadership works the opposite way. It searches for convenient explanations. It protects certain people while exposing others. And eventually, that destroys trust inside any organization. That is exactly why the aftermath of Indiana's loss to the New York Liberty has become such a major discussion among basketball fans. The game itself was frustrating enough. The Fever struggled offensively, the ball movement disappeared during crucial stretches, and New York looked far more organized when the pressure increased. But the real controversy started after the game when attention shifted toward Caitlin Clark's decision-making while many fans believe the larger offensive problems were barely addressed. Whether someone agrees or disagrees with Stephanie White's comments, one thing is undeniable. Basketball games are never decided by one player alone, especially when we're talking about a team built around multiple veterans, experienced scorers, and one of the league's youngest franchise point guards. When you actually watch the game instead of only reading statistics, a different picture begins to emerge. Caitlin Clark entered the league with one of the highest basketball IQ scouts have seen in years. Her greatest strength has never been scoring alone. It has always been creating offense for everyone else. She sees passing lanes before they develop. She pushes tempo. She forces defenses to stretch farther than they normally would. She makes teammates better simply because defenders have to respect her shooting range. But those strengths only matter when the offense actually flows through her. Throughout several possessions against New York, Clark often found herself standing away from the basketball while teammates initiated isolation offense. Instead of multiple passes forcing defenders to rotate, possessions frequently slowed into one-on-one basketball. Against an elite defensive team like the Liberty, that style becomes extremely difficult to sustain. The Liberty are simply too disciplined. Every unnecessary dribble gives their defenders time to recover. Every isolation possession allows them to stay organized. Every delayed pass makes scoring more difficult. Basketball has evolved into a game of spacing, timing, and quick decision-making. The best offenses rarely rely on one player dribbling for 10 or 15 seconds before attacking. Instead, they force defenders into impossible choices through constant movement. That was one of the biggest differences between both teams. New York trusted their system. Indiana often looked like individual players trying to solve problems alone. This is where Kelsey Mitchell enters the conversation. There is no question about her talent. She has been one of Indiana's most explosive scorers for years. She can beat defenders off the dribble. She can create difficult shots. She has carried the franchise through difficult seasons. None of those facts are in dispute. The question being asked isn't whether Mitchell is talented. The question is whether the offense becomes too predictable when possessions consistently turn into isolation basketball. Several analysts and fans pointed toward moments where ball movement completely stopped. Instead of forcing defensive rotations through passing, the offense slowed dramatically. Those empty possessions became even more noticeable because Clark, arguably the team's best playmaker, sometimes touched the ball very little during crucial stretches. When your primary point guard becomes a spectator, something inside the offensive structure deserves examination. That doesn't automatically mean one player is selfish. Basketball is far more complicated than that. Sometimes isolation plays are called by coaches. Sometimes players recognize favorable matchups. Sometimes the defense simply forces difficult decisions. But when the same pattern appears repeatedly, it becomes fair to ask whether adjustments need to be made. One criticism repeated by many observers involved Indiana's screening actions. Pick-and-roll basketball depends entirely on timing. The screener must arrive at the correct angle. The ball handler must attack immediately. The roller must force defensive help. The weak side must stay properly spaced. If even one of those elements breaks down, the entire action loses effectiveness. Against New York, there were several possessions where screens appeared late or failed to create enough separation for Clark to operate comfortably. Without quality screens, defenders stay attached. Without defensive collapse, passing lanes disappear. Without passing lanes, the offense stalls. These are structural problems. They cannot simply be blamed on the point guard. Another important factor is off-ball movement. Elite offenses never stop moving. Watch teams like the Liberty. Players constantly relocate. Shooters lift into open windows. Bigs reposition after screens. Cutters attack empty space. Defenders are forced to communicate every second. Indiana occasionally generated this type of movement. But too often possessions slowed into static basketball, where four players watched one teammate attempt to create. That makes life easier for any defense. One of the most debated aspects of Stephanie White's post-game comments was perception. Coaches often protect locker rooms by choosing their words carefully. Sometimes they publicly criticize veterans. Sometimes they defend rookies. Sometimes they avoid assigning blame altogether. Every coach has a different communication style. But perception matters. Many fans walked away believing Clark was receiving greater scrutiny than other players whose mistakes were equally visible throughout the game. Whether that interpretation was fair or not, it quickly became the dominant discussion online. And once that narrative begins spreading, rebuilding confidence inside the locker room becomes much harder. Young franchise players develop best when expectations remain clear. If they're expected to lead, they also need the freedom to lead. If they're expected to organize the offense must consistently run through them. If they're expected to make decisions, teammates must trust those decisions. Mixed signals create hesitation. Hesitation destroys offensive rhythm. Basketball is played in fractions of a second. The smallest pause changes everything. Perhaps the biggest lesson from this game has nothing to do with Clark or Mitchell individually. It concerns organizational identity. Who exactly is Indiana trying to become? Are they building around one of the greatest passing prospects women's basketball has ever seen? Or are they still relying primarily on veteran isolation scoring? Trying to balance both approaches is extremely difficult unless every player completely accepts defined roles. The Liberty already understand their identity. Everyone knows where shots come from. Everyone understands spacing. Everyone trusts ball movement. Everyone sacrifices individual statistics when necessary. That collective discipline wins championships. Indiana is still searching for that balance. The encouraging part is that these problems are fixable. Ball movement can improve. Screen setting can improve. Communication can improve. Role definition can improve. Trust can improve. But none of those improvements happen unless everyone inside the organization evaluates themselves honestly. Players must accept coaching. Coaches must accept responsibility. Veterans must adapt. Young stars must continue learning. Accountability cannot exist for only one person. It has to apply equally from the last player on the bench all the way to the head coach. That's what successful organizations do. This loss should not define Indiana's season. Every great team experiences difficult nights. Championship teams lose games. Future legends have terrible shooting performances. Coaches make mistakes. Veterans make mistakes. Rookies make mistakes. The difference is what happens afterward. Do they identify the real problems? Or do they settle for convenient explanations? That answer may determine not only Indiana's season, but also how quickly Caitlin Clark reaches her full potential inside this franchise. Because one thing remains absolutely clear. When the ball moves through Clark, Indiana's offense usually becomes faster, smarter, and far more unpredictable. When movement stops and isolation takes over, defenses become comfortable. The film repeatedly shows that difference. Statistics can tell part of the story. Press conferences can shape public opinion. But game tape rarely lies. The Fever still have enough talent to compete with anyone in the league. Aaliyah Boston remains one of the league's most intelligent young post players. Kelsey Mitchell remains an elite scorer capable of changing games. Caitlin Clark remains one of basketball's most gifted creators. Lexi Hull provides relentless energy. The supporting cast has shown flashes throughout the season. The pieces are there. The challenge is making those pieces function as one connected system instead of separate individuals chasing different solutions. Because basketball has always rewarded teams over talent. The teams that trust one another survive playoff pressure. The teams that move the basketball create better shots. The teams that embrace accountability build winning cultures. And the teams that refuse to confront uncomfortable truths eventually watch their potential disappear. The Indiana Fever still control their future. But if they truly want to become championship contenders, the conversation can no longer focus on finding one player to blame after every loss. It has to focus on building one system that gives every player the best chance to succeed. Only then will the results finally match the talent.